On my birthday, my wealthy grandpa smiled. "How do you spend your $5,400,000 trust fund?" I froze and said, "What trust fund?" My parents looked like they might throw up. He turned to them and asked, "Where did it go?" On my 27th birthday, the air tasted like expensive wine and secrets. Crystal stemware caught the candlelight, casting fractured rainbows across white tablecloths. Laughter rippled through the private dining room, but none of it felt like mine. My grandfather raised his champagne flute, his silver cufflinks gleaming, and smiled at me with those sharp blue eyes that had built empires. "So, Marigold," he said, voice carrying across the hushed conversations, "how do you spend your $5.4 million trust fund?" The world stopped spinning. I blinked. Once. Twice. The words hung in the air like smoke I couldn't quite grasp. What trust fund? Every fork froze mid-air. The soft jazz from the restaurant speakers seemed to distort, stretching into something unrecognizable. My mother's champagne glass tilted dangerously in her manicured hand, pale pink lipstick print smudged on the rim. My father's Adam's apple bobbed like he'd swallowed broken glass. Then my grandfather's expression shifted, calm as a lake before a storm. "Where did the money go?" His question split the evening wide open. Under the Edison bulbs and exposed brick of the Mercer House, surrounded by Seattle's elite dining on truffle risotto and seared scallops, I realized this dinner wasn't a celebration. It was an ambush. My name is Marigold Fletcher. Until that moment, I thought I knew exactly who my family was. I grew up in their world of silence and unspoken rules. Smile at charity galas. Never ask uncomfortable questions. And above all, never, ever discuss money. Not the having of it, not the wanting of it, certainly not the needing of it. Now I lived across town in Capitol Hill, worlds away from their waterfront estate in Bellevue. I worked as a freelance graphic designer out of a studio apartment, where the radiator clanked like angry percussion and the floorboards groaned when I walked. But it was mine. Every scratch on the second-hand desk, every mismatched plate in the cupboard, mine and earned. I spent my nights designing brand identities for local coffee shops and startups, the glow of my laptop the only light as Seattle's rain drummed against the windows. Cold coffee sat beside stacks of bills that always seemed to multiply faster than my bank balance. My parents, Richard and Carolyn Fletcher, lived 20 minutes away but might as well have been on another planet. Their 5-bedroom Craftsman overlooked Lake Washington, complete with a dock, a Lexus SUV for her, a BMW sedan for him. We talked, but only in the language of pleasantries and deflection. "How's work?" they'd ask. "Busy," I'd answer. The conversation would end before it began. The last time they'd truly surprised me was at my college graduation from Seattle Pacific University. I'd walked across that stage carrying $68,000 in student debt and a diploma I'd earned through all-nighters fueled by ramen and pure stubbornness. They hugged me in the auditorium, handed me a wrapped box with a silver bow, and said, "We are so proud of you, sweetheart." Inside was a hardcover book, The Millennial's Guide to Financial Independence. I smiled for the family photos, teeth aching from the forced grin. That night, I sat alone in my dorm room, staring at that book until the words blurred. They hadn't planned to help. Not with tuition. Not with housing. Not with the suffocating monthly payments that would follow me for the next decade. Still, I kept my head down and my expectations lower. I paid rent by taking on website projects that paid in 3 figures instead of 4. I skipped dinners with friends, laughing off their invitations. Next time, I'd say, knowing next time would be just as tight. When my college friends posted photos from Bali or Barcelona, I double-tapped and scrolled past, telling myself, one day I'll breathe easy. 1 week before my birthday, my boss called me into her office at the boutique design agency where I'd finally landed a salaried position. Her face said everything before her mouth opened. "Marigold, I'm so sorry. We are restructuring. Budget cuts." I packed my desk into a cardboard box, rode the light rail home, and collapsed onto my futon next to Iris, my roommate, my anchor, the one constant in 2 years of chaos. "Your parents will help, right?" she asked, her dark eyes hopeful in a way mine hadn't been in years. I laughed, bitter and sharp. "They'll probably email me a link to Indeed.com. That night, I called anyway. "Mom, I lost my job." Oh, honey, that's unfortunate. I heard the click of her keyboard, probably browsing Nordstrom online. But you're resourceful. You'll figure something out. You always do. I'm 3 weeks behind on rent, Mom. I don't know how. Well, perhaps this is a learning opportunity about emergency funds. Anyway, we've made reservations for your birthday dinner. Carnley's, 7:30. Don't be late. Mom, that place is $400 a person. She laughed, light and dismissive. Don't be cheap, Marigold. It's your birthday. Wear something nice. The line went dead. I stared at my reflection in the darkened TV screen. Tired eyes. Split ends I couldn't afford to trim. Lipstick worn off hours ago. $400 a plate, I whispered to the empty room. That's my entire grocery budget. Iris looked up from her laptop. You don't have to go. Yeah, I do. In my family, missing dinner was worse than heresy. So I circled the date on my wall calendar with red marker, the way someone might mark the day of their execution. The days crawled toward my birthday like wounded animals. I tried to stay busy, sending out resumes, updating my portfolio website, cold emailing potential clients. But rejection emails piled up faster than I could read them. Thank you for your interest, but we've decided to pursue other candidates. We'll keep your information on file. My savings account balance dipped below 4 digits for the first time since college. Every footstep in the hallway made me flinch, half expecting my landlord's knock. The eviction notice that would seal my fate. By Friday, I'd stopped sleeping properly. Iris found me at 2:47 a.m., still hunched over my laptop in the dark, the screen's blue light making my skin look corpse pale. Marie, you need to sleep, she said softly, wrapping a blanket around my shoulders. I can't. If I stop moving, I'll think about it. About what? That dinner. Them sitting there pretending everything's perfect while I'm drowning. She squeezed my shoulder, her warmth the only real thing in the room. Then make it the last time they treat you like this. I didn't understand what she meant yet, but those words stuck. Saturday arrived bright and cold, that particular Seattle brightness that cuts through rain clouds like a knife. I stood in front of my closet, staring at the same pathetic options. Jeans with frayed hems. A blazer missing the left button. A black dress from 3 years ago, bought for a job interview that went nowhere. I chose the dress. It still fit, mostly, though the zipper protested. On the bus ride to the restaurant, I watched the city slide past the rain-streaked windows. Tourists in waterproof jackets clustered around Pike Place Market. A couple shared an umbrella, laughing. A kid in a Seahawks jersey licked a waffle cone, ice cream dripping down his wrist despite the cold. I envied how simple their moments were. Carnley's perched on a hillside overlooking Lake Union, all mid-century modern elegance and old Seattle money. My parents were already seated when I arrived, positioned at a corner table with a view that probably cost extra. Mom wore a cream silk blouse and pearls. Dad, his charcoal suit with the Hermes tie I'd seen in 100 family photos. The table glittered with wine glasses and silverware I couldn't name. Happy birthday, sweetheart. Mom air-kissed me, her perfume so strong it made my sinuses ache. Dad smiled that practiced smile. You look tired. Rough week. Lost my job, I said quietly. He nodded like I'd mentioned a traffic delay. Well, these things happen. You'll bounce back. They launched into stories about their recent trip to Napa, the new Lexus's lane assist feature, plans to remodel the master bathroom with Italian marble. My words dissolved into white noise. I kept glancing at the exit, counting minutes like a prisoner counts days. I was supposed to feel celebrated, but I felt like a prop in their perfect picture. Proof they were good parents. Look, we take our daughter to nice dinners. Then the door opened. A ripple of recognition swept through the restaurant as my grandfather walked in. William Fletcher, silver-haired, 6'2", every step deliberate and commanding. The maître d' nearly tripped over himself escorting him. My mother's smile cracked. Dad? What are you doing here? Celebrating my granddaughter, obviously. His eyes found mine, warm and knowing. Happy birthday, Marigold. He hugged me, solid and real, and I took my first full breath all evening. I didn't know you were coming, I managed. Wouldn't miss it. He sat beside me, ordered a Scotch neat, and made polite conversation with my parents. But there was an edge in his voice, sharp as a blade hidden in velvet. Like he already knew something explosive, and was simply waiting for the right moment to detonate it. Then he smiled at me, raised his glass, and said the words that shattered everything I thought I knew about my life. The Scotch caught the candlelight as my grandfather lifted his glass with steady hands. "So, Marigold," he said, tone conversational, almost casual, "how do you spend your $5.4 million trust fund?" The air crystallized. I heard my heartbeat before I registered the silence that followed. Felt my pulse in my throat, my wrists, behind my eyes. I blinked. What trust fund? Every fork stopped. Every conversation at nearby tables seemed to fade into a vacuum. My mother's smile fractured like dropped china. My father's throat worked as if he'd swallowed razors. My grandfather's expression remained perfectly calm. He simply leaned back in his chair, one hand resting on the white tablecloth. "The trust one established when you were born. Your parents were appointed trustees. They were supposed to transfer it to you when you turned 25. My mother laughed. "Too high, too fast." "Oh, Dad, you're confused. There must be some mistake." "Carolyn." His voice dropped to a register I'd never heard before. "Don't." It was the first time in my life I'd seen her go absolutely still. He turned to our waiter, slipping him something folded. "Private dining room. Now, please." Within minutes, we were being ushered through the restaurant, past curious stares, leaving behind half-eaten Dungeness crab and untouched champagne. The door to a private room closed behind us with a soft click that sounded final as a coffin lid. Inside, the temperature felt 10 degrees colder. My grandfather's executive assistant, Patricia, was already there, iPad glowing in her hands. A man in an expensive suit stood beside her, briefcase at his feet. "Daniel Morrison," Grandpa said. "My attorney." "This won't take long," Grandpa continued. "I simply want clarity." Daniel opened his briefcase, pulled out a leather folder, and slid a stack of documents across the table. "Miss Fletcher, this is the trust account created in your name. Initial deposit, $2 million. Current value, given market growth and compound interest over 27 years, should be approximately $5.4 million. My fingers trembled as I reached for the papers. The letterhead was real. My name, printed in legal formatting. Account numbers that looked like they meant something. "Should be," I whispered. Daniel's jaw tightened. "As of this morning, the balance is $287,000. The words hit like a physical blow, stealing the air from my lungs. $287,000. 27 years of savings, investments, carefully managed growth. Gone. Vanished. Stolen. My grandfather's gaze never left my parents. "Explain." Dad wiped his forehead with a cloth napkin, leaving a smudge of sweat on the white fabric. We used some of it. Just temporarily. To cover expenses when Richard's firm had that rough quarter. Some. Grandpa's voice stayed terrifyingly calm. "That's over $5 million, Richard. Plus interest." Mom's hands trembled around her clutch purse, knuckles white. We were managing it for her future. We didn't want her to waste it on frivolous things. I laughed. Short, sharp, ugly. The sound that came out of me didn't feel human. Frivolous? Like rent? Like student loans? Like food? Mom turned to me, tears already pooling in her eyes. "Sweetheart, we only wanted what's best. You gave me a personal finance book for graduation." My voice cracked, breaking around the edges. "While you were draining my account." Grandpa raised one hand. The room fell silent immediately. "Enough." He turned to Patricia. "Read the withdrawals." Her voice was mechanical, clinical, as she read from her iPad. Mortgage payoff on Bellevue property, $625,000. Vehicle purchases, 2 Lexus vehicles, $145,000. Home renovations including kitchen and master bath remodel, $380,000. Investment in Carolyn Fletcher Interior Design LLC, $750,000. Company subsequently filed for bankruptcy, total loss. Each line felt like another punch. I couldn't breathe. Couldn't process the numbers fast enough. Patricia paused. When she spoke again, her voice was softer. Purchase a vacation property in Whidbey Island, $2.8 million. Currently registered under Richard and Carolyn Fletcher. I stared at them. A vacation house. A place they'd probably been planning to retire to while I ate ramen for dinner. My father's face went slack, grey. It was an investment. A smart. It was theft, Grandpa said quietly. From your own daughter. No one spoke. The only sound was the muted hum of the restaurant beyond the door, the distant clatter of dishes, laughter from people whose lives weren't imploding. Finally, my grandfather pushed back his chair with a scrape that made me flinch. Give me the keys. Mom's eyes darted to her purse. She hesitated, fingers hovering over the clasp. Now. She pulled out a small keyring. 2 brass keys and a car fob. Her hand shook violently as she set them on the table with a soft clink. Grandpa slid them across to me. These are yours. 2 years late, but yours. They were still warm from her palm when I picked them up. My keys. My property. My life that had been kept from me while I struggled and scraped and went without. Mom started crying, soft practice sobs that I'd heard 1,000 times when she wanted something. Please, Dad. Don't do this. We are family. Family doesn't steal from family, he said. You'll be hearing from my legal team tomorrow morning. They stood slowly, as if gravity had tripled. My father wouldn't meet my eyes. My mother clutched her purse like a life preserver. The door closed behind them. The silence that followed felt lighter, cleaner somehow, like air after storm. Grandpa turned to me, his expression softening. Marigold, I'll have a complete forensic audit done. They'll face legal consequences. But the decision to press criminal charges, that's yours to make. I looked down at the keys in my palm, metal cold against my skin. For 27 years, I'd begged for scraps of their approval, their attention, their love. Now I held proof that their love had a price tag, and I hadn't been worth protecting. I need time, I whispered. Take it, he said. But you should know, they were planning to disappear. Patricia found plane tickets to Costa Rica, purchased 3 days ago. One way. My chest tightened until I thought my ribs might crack. They came to dinner knowing this was goodbye. He nodded slowly, and they smiled while doing it. 3 days after that birthday dinner, I was summoned to my grandfather's office in the Columbia Center, a glass tower downtown that seemed to pierce the clouds. I hadn't slept more than a few hours since the revelation. The words they were planning to run played on an endless loop in my mind. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my mother's trembling hand releasing those keys. My father's silence that felt like confession. The plane tickets to Costa Rica. When I arrived, Patricia was waiting in the lobby, immaculate in a charcoal suit, iPad cradled in one arm. They're already here, she said quietly. William wanted you present for this. My stomach dropped. Both of them. She nodded. They came to negotiate. The word tasted wrong in my mouth. The elevator ride to the 45th floor felt like ascending to another dimension. Glass walls, leather chairs the color of old whiskey, the faint scent of cedar and power. Grandpa sat behind his massive desk, posture military straight, hands clasped. Across from him sat my parents. Dad looked like he'd aged a decade. Mom was trying to maintain her usual polished appearance, but her lipstick was uneven, applied with shaking hands. Marigold, Grandpa said, voice steady as bedrock. Sit. I sat in the chair beside him, opposite my parents. No one spoke for a long moment. The only sound was an antique clock on the wall, ticking away seconds like a countdown. Finally, Dad cleared his throat. We didn't mean for it to go this far. We were desperate. Desperate? Grandpa's voice could have cut glass. To maintain a lifestyle you couldn't afford. Trying to stay afloat, Dad said, but even he didn't sound convinced. You wouldn't understand. I understand greed perfectly, Grandpa interrupted. I built my company on recognizing it. Mom leaned forward, tears already streaming. We love her, Dad. We were going to tell her eventually, when the time was right. After you'd finished selling the Whidbey house. Silence. Daniel Morrison stepped forward, setting a thick stack of bank statements on the desk with a heavy thud. The forensic audit is complete, he said, flipping open the cover. Every transaction traced. Every property connected. Every lie documented. He turned pages, each one a knife wound. We've recovered approximately $2.3 million through asset seizures and forced sales of the Whidbey property. The Lexus vehicles have been repossessed. The country club membership, cancelled. My father rubbed his temples. $2.3 million? But we already paid. You didn't recover anything, Daniel said sharply. We did. Through legal channels. You don't get credit for returning what you stole. I watched the scene from what felt like outside my body, floating somewhere near the ceiling. Every lie was being peeled away like dead skin. Every secret dragged into fluorescent light. Patricia handed me a manila folder. Inside were photos. The Whidbey Island property, a sprawling waterfront home with a private dock. Receipts for jewelry, a $40,000 Cartier bracelet for Mom's 50th birthday. Cruise bookings to the Mediterranean. All funded by my trust fund while I'd been eating dollar menu burgers and walking to save bus fare. You should know what they valued more than you, Patricia said softly. My throat tightened. This is enough for criminal charges. Yes, Daniel replied. Felony financial fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, theft. They're looking at up to 10 years in federal prison. Mom gasped, a sharp intake of breath. Marigold, you wouldn't, please. Her voice broke like a child's, but I felt nothing. No sympathy. No wavering. I didn't do this, I said quietly. You did. My father leaned forward, desperation bleeding through his carefully maintained facade. We made mistakes. Terrible mistakes. But prison? We're your parents. Parents protect, I said, voice steadier than I expected. They don't pillage. Grandpa turned to me. It's your choice, sweetheart. Always has been. The room blurred around me. The Seattle skyline beyond the glass, grey clouds rolling in from the sound. The papers documenting their betrayal. The trembling hands across the desk. I thought of 27 years. Birthday dinners where I'd smiled through silence. Student loan payments made with ramen and overtime shifts. Holidays where they'd sent flowers but not love. I met my mother's eyes. Really looked at her. You left me with nothing while you lived off my future. Please. Now you have exactly what you gave me. Nothing. The words landed like thunder. Mom's shoulders collapsed inward. Dad looked away, jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscle jumping. Grandpa nodded once to Daniel. File the necessary motions. Mom reached across the table, her voice breaking. Dad, please. She's your granddaughter. And you are my daughter, he said. But there's a difference between blood and character. You chose greed. Now live with it. She began to sob, real tears this time, not the practiced kind. But they weren't for me. They were for everything she was losing. The lifestyle. The status. The comfort of never facing consequences. As the lawyers finalized paperwork, I stood and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows. Seattle stretched below, cranes building new towers, cars inching through traffic, ferries crossing Elliott Bay. The slow pulse of people living their lives. I pressed my palm to the glass. The cold grounded me. For the first time in my life, I wasn't small. Behind me, I heard Grandpa say, property deeds, bank accounts, all transferred back to Marigold Fletcher, effective immediately. When I turned, Patricia handed me a slim envelope. These are your property documents. The Whidbey Island house is now fully under your name. I nodded, throat tight. Thank you. Mom whispered something, her voice barely audible. You'll regret this. I looked at her. Really looked. The woman who taught me to keep my voice soft, my needs smaller, my worth tied to their approval. No, I said. For once, I won't. They were escorted out by building security. The door clicked shut. The silence that followed wasn't heavy anymore. It was clean. Clear. Like the first morning after a week of rain. Grandpa stood slowly, walking over to me. You did the right thing. I don't feel good about it, I admitted. Justice rarely feels good at first, he said. But it's necessary. It's how we protect ourselves and others from harm. He placed a hand on my shoulder, firm and steady. You're not alone anymore, Marigold. You never were, but now you know it. That night, I went to see the property, the one I'd never been allowed to know existed. The Whidbey Island house was a 2-hour drive north, across the Deception Pass Bridge, through forests that smelled like cedar and rain. Patricia had given me the address and security codes. When I pulled up in the Uber I'd splurged on, I understood why they'd stolen for this. The house sprawled across a bluff overlooking Puget Sound. Cedar shingles weathered silver. Floor-to-ceiling windows reflecting sunset. A private beach below, accessible by wooden stairs that wound down the cliff face. It was stunning. And it was built with my future. The door opened with a soft beep when I entered the code. Inside smelled like expensive candles, something vanilla and cedar that probably cost more than my monthly rent used to. Everything was staged perfectly. Neutral tones, leather furniture, a coffee table book about Pacific Northwest architecture. A stranger's life, furnished with my money. I wandered through rooms like a ghost haunting my own property. My fingertips brushed walls, countertops, door frames. In the kitchen, I found a rental agreement folder. Tenant names. Deposit receipts. My parents had been collecting $4,500 a month in rent for the past year, while I'd been behind on my $1,200 apartment. I sank onto the leather couch and laughed. The sound came out raw, jagged. Then the laughter broke into tears. Not grief this time. Release. Iris arrived an hour later in her beat-up Honda, bringing Thai takeout. You're really here, she whispered, eyes wide as she walked through the door. I'm home, I said, testing the words. They felt foreign. She looked around, smiled that knowing smile of hers. So how does justice feel? Quiet, I said, and heavier than I expected. We ate sitting on the floor, takeout containers spread between us like old times. Through the massive windows, the sound stretched dark and glittering, fairies moving like slow stars. Somewhere on the kitchen counter, the keys gleamed. A reminder of everything stolen and everything reclaimed. Before bed, I texted Grandpa, moved in. Thank you for fighting when I couldn't. His reply came seconds later. You always could, Marigold. You just needed proof. I stared at that message until my screen dimmed. Proof of what they'd done. Proof of who I could become when I stopped apologizing for taking up space. A month passed before I could sleep through the night without waking at 3 a.m., expecting another secret to surface, another lie to unravel. But the legal proceedings moved swiftly. My parents' remaining assets, the Bellevue house with its lake views, what little was left in their accounts, were liquidated. The proceeds poured back into my trust fund, back under my name where they should have been all along. They moved into a 1-bedroom apartment in Kent, a suburb they'd once called unfortunate. Grandpa told me in his usual matter-of-fact way, they're paying court-ordered restitution. $800 a month for the next 20 years. I didn't feel joy hearing it. Just balance, like a scale finally evening out. I settled into the Whidbey house but kept my Capitol Hill apartment too. Some mornings, I'd wake up to island silence, fog rolling across the water like breath. Other mornings, I'd wake up to Seattle's chaos, sirens, and buses and the coffee shop on the corner grinding beans at 6 a.m. I worked from both places, freelancing, but now clients came to me. Referrals from Grandpa's network. Startups that needed branding. Established companies looking for fresh perspectives. For once, I wasn't scrambling. I was choosing. Building something sustainable. Iris came over every weekend, sometimes to the city apartment, sometimes to the island. We'd hang out, cook elaborate meals, sit on the deck watching eagles hunt. You realize, she said once, laughing over wine, you could probably buy the whole building in Capitol Hill now. I don't want to own more things, I said. Just more peace. Weeks turned into months. My name was on everything now. bank accounts, property deeds, investment portfolios. But it wasn't the money that settled something in my chest. It was the ownership of my own life. The ability to choose without fear. One evening, Grandpa invited me to dinner at his home in Medina, the estate I'd visited every Christmas as a child. He looked frailer than I remembered, but lighter, as if some weight had lifted. "You did what I couldn't," he told me over dessert. "You drew a line. Made it clear that love without integrity is just manipulation." I smiled. "You taught me how." He shook his head. "I gave you information. You chose action. There's a difference." That night, driving back across the bridge to the island, I passed the Mercer House, the restaurant where everything had begun. Through the windows, I could see people laughing, toasting, unaware of how fast a family can fracture over greed and secrets. I didn't stop. Some chapters deserve to stay closed. 6 months after my 27th birthday, I stood on the deck of the Whidbey House watching the sun set over the Olympic Mountains. The water caught fire with orange and pink. A seal surfaced near the beach, dark head bobbing. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "This is your mother. Can we talk?" I stared at it for a long time. Felt the old instinct to respond immediately, to soothe, to smooth things over. That deeply ingrained need to make them comfortable. Then I deleted it. I'd learned that blood doesn't always mean loyalty. That family is supposed to protect, not pillage. That silence is sometimes the most powerful answer. My parents had stolen my future and called it love. Took opportunities from me while I struggled, and told themselves they were teaching me character. But I'd taken it all back, piece by piece, quietly, legally, completely. Now when I looked out over the Sound, I didn't see what I'd lost. I saw what I'd rebuilt. A life that was mine. Decisions that were mine. Peace that was mine. I'd started a design firm, hired 2 other freelancers who'd been struggling the way I had. We worked remotely, charged fair rates, turned down clients who wanted to exploit our labor. Iris moved into the island house with me. We turned one of the spare bedrooms into a shared studio, windows overlooking the water, our desks positioned side by side. Grandpa visited often, bringing wine and stories about building his company from nothing. "You remind me of myself at your age," he said once. Before I learned that success and integrity could coexist. I'd also started volunteering with a youth financial literacy program, teaching teenagers about trusts, investments, protecting themselves from family members who might see them as assets to exploit rather than people to protect. On my 28th birthday, I threw a party. Not at an expensive restaurant, but on the beach below the house. We built a bonfire. Roasted marshmallows. Iris brought her guitar. Friends from college showed up, people I'd lost touch with during the years of struggling. As the fire crackled and sparks rose into the dark sky, someone asked, "What would you tell your younger self?" I thought about the girl who'd opened that personal finance book on graduation day. The woman who'd ridden the bus to a $400 dinner while behind on rent. The person who'd believed she was the problem. I'd tell her that people who love you don't make you small, I said. And that taking up space isn't selfish. It's survival. Later, alone on the deck after everyone left, I checked my investment accounts. The trust fund had grown to $4.2 million, properly managed now. But I also had my design firm income. My own earnings. Money I'd made with my skills and sweat. That felt like the real wealth. My phone buzzed again. Another text from my mother. "Please. We need help with rent." I blocked the number. Some bridges burn for a reason. Some doors close and should stay closed. I'd spent 27 years trying to earn love from people who'd already decided I was worth less than their comfort. Now I was building something different. A life where my value wasn't negotiable. Where trust was earned, not assumed. Where family meant protection, not exploitation. The moon rose over the water, full and bright. Somewhere across the Sound, Seattle glittered with possibility. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I belonged to myself. If you've ever been betrayed by the people you trusted most, remember this: you can start over. You can build something better from the ashes. And sometimes, the family you choose becomes more real than the family you were born into. My name is Marigold Fletcher. This is my story of theft, revelation, and reclaiming everything they tried to take. And I'm just getting started.